Вітаю на черговому нашій презентації з моніторингу відбудови, який ми робимо
Welcome to
в рамках
our
проекту
next
контрольно-витратне відновлення
meeting
України за
that we're
підтримки
doing
ЄС.
together
Ми
with
це
the EU
Інститут економічних досліджень та
support
політичної
control over the
консультації.
costs for rebuilding Ukraine,
Це
Center
Центр
for
економічної
Economic
стратегії, а
Strategy,
також
Economic
технології прогресу.
Consultation, and
Сьогодні ми будемо говорити про
Taxes in
дуже важливу
Progress. We
тему.
will
Як
talk
ви
about a
якраз
very
почали
important
зіштовхуватися
subject
дуже
that we
багато, коли ми
started to
говоримо про
run
моніторинг
into when
відбудови.
we say a lot
Це
about the
з чого
monitoring of
якраз
recovery.
лініється
It's
будівельна сфера
exactly
до
what is
відновлення
happening in
України.
our
Чи ми
construction
готові, чи
sphere.
готова
Are we
наша сфера,
ready?
чи в нас
Whether
достатньо
this
будівельних
sphere, this
матеріалів,
area is
щоб ми
ready? Do we have
зробимо
enough
взагалі в цій сфері?
construction materials?
Для
What
тих,
is
хто нас
exactly
слухає
happening in
англійською
this
мовою, хочу
area?
нагадати, що в
Those of
нас
you who
є
are
переклад
listening
на
to
англійську
us in
мову.
English, we do have the
If you listen
translation.
us you can listen us in English and you just have to select English translation in the button of interpretation. Отже, ми починаємо з того,
So
що
we are
ми цього разу,
starting
як
from the
зазвичай,
point that
підготували нашу
we, as
презентацію по
usual, we have
моніторингу
prepared
відбудови.
our presentation
Перші
for the
слайди
monitoring and
присвячені тому, що
recovery.
змінилося
The
в
first slides
законодавстві, основні зміни,
um,
а
uh,
також кілька цифр саме по фінансуванню
pertain to
відбудови.
what has changed in
І з
terms of
того я
the
хочу сказати про те, що ми
legislation,
нарешті отримали
and
міністра,
we have
так це
received
називається Міністерство розвитку
the
громад, хоча
Ministry
це
of
не
the Development
Міністерство
of
інфраструктури,
Homonets,
але воно займається тим
but
самим,
it's
тобто в нас є
doing
нарешті міністр, ми
the
чекаємо
same.
призначення
So we are waiting for
голови
the
агентства з відновлення, що для нас дуже
appointment
важливо,
of
як
the
наших
head of
саме
the
партнерів
recovery
по
agency, which is very
впровадженню
important for our
держпроектів,
partners.
бенефіціарів основних. І
And it's
важливо
important
зазначити, що
to
також
mention
і подано було проект бюджету
that
на
the
наступний рік. Про
draft
це ми
budget
будемо говорити
was
детальніше
submitted for
саме
next
наступного
year.
разу,
We
але
will
зараз хочу
talk in
зазначити,
more
що
detail next time, but now I want
фінансування
to mention
відбудови передбачено в
that
бюджеті
the
на більш
financing of
обсягах,
the
ніж було
recovery
цього року.
is foreseen in the
Це,
budget
якщо
in
коротко,
more
трошки
volumes than this
детальніше
year.
дивіться нашу
That's briefly,
презентацію.
but
А
in
зараз
more
хотіла
detail,
передати
please
слово
look up our
Володимирі
presentation.
Ланді,
Now I would like to pass
старшому
the floor to Volodymyr Landa,
економісту
our senior
Центру економічної
economist
стратегії,
with the
який
Center of
якраз
Economic
розкаже
Strategy,
про
who will
результати свого
exactly say
аналізу
about the
того,
results of
як
his
що
analysis
робиться з
of
будівництвом на
how this is
прифронтових
done
територіях. Ми
with
маємо робити
construction at
трошки
the
аналіз саме
frontline
прифронтовими
areas.
територіями, тому що нас
So,
цікавить переважно
because we are
відновлення
interested
відбудови, і
very
там його
much
більше.
in the
Володі, будь ласка.
recovery, uh,
Дякую,
recovery, and
Олександра.
it's much more there. Thank you, Oleksandra.
Презентацію.
Let me
Скажіть,
open up
чи
my
видно
presentation.
її належним
Do you
чином?
see my
І
presentation?
почнемо з
And let us
традиційного
start
огляду
from the
всіх закупівель.
traditional overview
В
of all
серпні
procurements.
закупівлі
In
продовжилися
August,
очікуваним темпом, і кількість
the
закупівель з
procurement
початку року в будівельній галузі
in the
зросла
construction
майже до
area,
83 тисяч,
they grew
з яких
almost to
майже
83,000
93% успішно
procurements, out of
завершені,
which
відбулися та
some
скасовані
93%
приблизно
took place
6%, і
and
ще трохи
didn't
більше
happen
відсотка
or
триває.
cancelled. It was like
Загальна сума
6%, and
закупівель цього року
1.3%
досягла
is still lasting. The
179
overall
мільярдів
number
гривень. Це
amount
без
of
врахування тих
procurement
закупівель,
for the
які ще
first 8
тривають,
months
як
amounts to
практика.
169
Закупівлі,
billion hryvnia,
фінальна сума, яка
including
найбільша,
the
можуть
current amount,
тривати в
11.2
середньому
billion,
довгий середній
without
закупівель,
those
іноді до
lots
декілька
where we
місяців.
don't
Тому
have the defined
переважна
current
кількість
value.
закупівель триває від 2 до 4 тижнів.
And actually, the biggest
Електронна
number of
система була використана для 17%
procurement is
закупівель,
lasting
але
between
це
2
значно
and
найбільші
4 months,
закупівлі, на них
2 and 4
перекладено
weeks.
майже
The
60%
electronic system was
загальної
used
суми.
for
Ну і
14,000
охоронні
completed
закупівлі
procurement, 17% of the total amount of
перестали
107 billion hryvnia. The defense procurement used to be much more. They now 13% from the overall number. In August, they are not that many, only 32 million hryvnia, but let me repeat that this amount may be increased. We don't have big changes in terms of the leaders in organizing and winning in procurement. We can see the first 5 list is not changed, and let us remind you which were the biggest procurements this year. We have one newcomer. It's the reconstruction of the transmission lines, power lines between Chernobyl and Kiev Oblast. It was completed several months ago. The rest of the leaders remain from the previous periods. Unfortunately, we have the deterioration of the situation with the competitiveness of the procurement. The situation is even worse than in July. Some 90% of the procurements that took place in the East system have only one participant and 8% two participants, so absolutely no competition is around, and exactly the provision of competitiveness and decreasing of costs for procurement. That's a very important item in various policies that we will be advocating. And talking about our special subject, we want to talk a little bit more what exactly is the recovering on the frontline zones. If we say more correctly, we analyze Kharkivska, Mykolaievska, Zaporizhska, Donetska, Sumska, Khersonska, and Luhanska oblasts, the companies who are registered in these regions. But of course, theoretically, the companies can provide their activity not in the area of registration. I mean, there are a lot of Kiev-based companies who are doing a lot of work there. But we are actually now looking at companies who are registered in these oblasts, and we can see how this market is distributed, at least how it was distributed in 2023. We can see that from $1 billion, namely 37.1 billion hryvnia, the procurement of construction companies, most of it it's actually residential and non-residential buildings code, also significant volumes for roads and highways. Other codes are distributed between many other codes, and Kharkiv Oblast remains a leader in procurement that we are analyzing. Also in Mykolaievska and Zaporizhska Oblast, we also have significant volumes. It's an interesting aspect when we see that the residential and non-residential buildings occupy the biggest part, the biggest share of the volume, but the biggest tenders are not in this area, but rather in roads and highways. If we look at the biggest companies, it's from 2023. So we can see that in 2023 compared to 2022, 9 out of 10 companies grew. In the same way, year 2022 showed some mixed dynamics. Some companies were decreasing construction, some were joining the recovery. So we can see that based on the summary of 2023, the sales of all companies decreased, and based on the results of 2024, this could be returned, and I think 1 or 2 companies that will be going above this limit, because the leaders in this list, they have really different specialization. Yush Energobud and Trezhetlobud have the same code, buildings, but it's understood from the name, they're actually specialized in industrial energy-based construction, while Zhitlobud on residential housing. The third place is occupied by the company that is doing some mine construction, and the fourth one is doing the construction of roadways. If we talk about some special procurements that were the biggest, then it's mainly, as we said before, the road construction related in Kharkiv, in Zaporizhia Oblast. The biggest this year, the biggest procurement was the reconstruction of the Zaporizhia hospital for 327 million hryvnia, and the building of some fortifications for 216 million. Although the code is masked, we can see the value, it's 216 million. So what kind of conclusions can we make? What we haven't said yet, it's exactly Kharkiv and Mykolaiv Oblast, and the regions which have the biggest control, and where they have some at least relatively safe, but of course not safe to a normal regime, then that's where we have the biggest construction activity. Also a very interesting fact that almost exclusively the Ukrainian capital is in the construction area. The biggest company that belongs not to residents of Ukraine. It's not even in top 30. Its beneficiary is a citizen of Armenia, and their sales is like $3 million. The rest, all the leaders are either the citizens of Ukraine or the Ukrainian legal entities. That's all. Passing the floor back to colleagues. Many thanks, Volodymyr. We have seen the results, and actually we have a lot of competition, which is a lot of procurement, which is not based on the competition, and when it's possible not to have the e-procurement. That's basically confirmed by the monitoring that is done by our colleagues. Once a quarter, I would like to invite you that we declare a competition for NGOs who are ready to monitor procurement and the recovery of the social infrastructure. So somebody who is listening to us and has not yet participated in this competition, the next one will be in October, so do join us on monitoring of the recovery of Ukraine. Those of you who are hearing us, of course, there are certain questions. What kind of companies are here? So it's no surprise that a lot of companies are doing the road construction, but I wanted to pass the floor to Maxym Nefyodov, the co-founder of Technologies of Progress. He's the partner in this project, for him to tell us which challenges we have in the construction area, what we have, what we are looking at, and the figures that Volodymyr has said. Dear colleagues, good afternoon. I hope you see my presentation. Together with the Kyiv School of Economics, under the initiative of the European Business Association, in the summer we did a research in terms of the structural changes in the construction industry of Ukraine. Very often we say that how much money we need for the recovery, and from time to time, at least some, I can't say in percentages to what was ruined, damaged or destroyed, but really huge amounts are being promised by partners during the full-scale war and especially after it's over. But very seldom the question is asked how easy, how in high quality and with the use of the country for the industry of the country, these funds can be transformed into construction. Sometimes we have the impression that we have to build exactly with dollars, that namely that the walls have to be composed of dollars, while works and the construction materials and the producers of construction materials is just some technical aspect to it. Partially, this could be explained that in the past, this sector was rapidly developing, and apart from several segments, we didn't have any basic deficit of the construction materials, and it always seemed that the supply would always follow the demand. And our research was exactly proposed in order to see which challenges we have, where we evidently can face some deficits, where we have the bottlenecks for the expansion of the production, and also what would be the challenges in front of the industry from the point of view of the European integration. And we have to understand that some construction practices, they will be going back into the past, because for some this could be a problem, for some this could be a possibility, opportunity. So I would like to remind you that unfortunately during the full-scale invasion from the Russian destruction, not only residential houses are suffering, not only people, but also business, including the production of construction materials. And definitely that also brings to some significant fall and change of the demand. And although Volodymyr said quite optimistic indicators of what happening is in 24, like more construction companies are in the frontline areas, they are demonstrating some positive pace of growing. We have to understand that this happened after a very significant fall, and in many areas this was like 90% fall. So we understand that in those times when Kharkiv and Sumy and Kramatorsk are being shelled by aerial bombs every day, it would be premature to believe that we will have residential construction. It's naive to think so. At the same time, we can't say that the market is dead, or even now that we're in some expectation phase. No, not at all. In the west of Ukraine, in general, there is, I mean, I can't say it's a boom, but the construction is growing even compared to the pre-war times. And meaning until the full-scale invasion, of course, we should not forget that the war started in 2014. That's also important to mention from the point of view of relocation of resources, because our production, to a great extent, was concentrated in the east and in the central Ukraine. So quite a significant growth of prices for various types of materials, and from 30 to 70%. The average growth was 53%, which basically meets the overall level of inflation that has been some 48% since the beginning of the full-scale invasion. But in some segments, the ones who are critically dependent on imports, this growth was quite painful for the construction companies, for developers, from the point of view of reorientation to some new types of construction. And definitely the aspect that is being emphasized by absolutely everybody, and it's not only the construction companies that are facing this, but also others who are doing the commissioning and maintenance. They say that it's a huge deficit of staff. This is connected to conscription, overall deficit of staff, and this is one of the challenges that will limit of turning these future dollars into built square meters. In terms of the square meters, we have been destroyed almost 140 million square meters of buildings. Part of it is just damaged and theoretically can be renewed, recovered, but this is like the overall volume that could be of the demand that could be after the end of the war. This is the data from Damage UA, and it includes only the verified destruction, not the housing that was lost or the objects of social infrastructure that were lost on the occupied territories, or whether their condition is not known to us. So it's exactly the case when we definitely understand that these objects were damaged and lost, and people will be searching either the recovery of the same objects or building better objects or relocation or building up in other regions of Ukraine. But from the point of view of the demand, evidently it will meet the structure of the economy, and it can't be any big peaks, but we understand that Russians are absolutely just randomly ruining everything in the whole blocks of apartments. So the residential buildings are suffering first. Number two is business. The rest is, again, if we talk about very cynically in terms of the demand, it also means that from the point of view of some urgent repairs, and after that, this will be the biggest process of construction in the history of Ukraine. And this is also the additional possibility I will briefly touch later. Here we also define the objectives of the Ukraine facility. Whoever is interested, we have a big section in terms of which influence the European integration will have on the industrial sectors and on construction sectors, because it's important to understand that in many spheres, the standards will be changed, the approaches will be changed, and we have to take into account the compliance with the European norms. Also, a significant part of these norms, they have to be met already now, because a significant part of the objects are being rebuilt directly using the funds of donors or international financial organizations, the European Investment Bank or the World Bank. They're running tenders, and they are counting not only on national standards, partially, that could be outdated already, but also on standards and those architectural solutions that they expect in the developed countries. On the one hand, this is a challenge. On the other hand, it's a huge possibility to get better objects. In terms of these objects, the objects where we have the demand, as at 1 month ago, DREAM and Big Recovery Portal that we are developing together with the Institute of Economic Research. It's thousands of projects, 862 projects with 198 billion hryvnia. We are adding number of projects, dozens of projects on a weekly basis. This is demand that is actually here already now, and a significant part of these projects are already in some active phase. They have at least partial financing. They at least are being developed. These efficiency indicators, and the construction is actively moving. Separately, I would like to say that we see the relatively low quality of projects. Part of it is the projects until the full-scale invasion that received a green light. Why not? Part of it is some urgent repairs, and again, it's a huge challenge, but also a huge opportunity for the architectural community, because the last thing we want to have is that everything will be renewed just as it is, some Russian, like Soviet objects, Soviet standards of insulation or energy efficiency. That would be a very sad story if we did it like this. So, in a way where this theoretical experience is transformed into real, you can see this is a relative uniform coverage of the whole Ukraine. Of course, there is more in Kiev Oblast, but this is connected also with the fact that we had significant damages to Kiev Oblast during Russian occupation, and from the other hand, this territory is closer to the capital, where other donors are here. So it's easier to rebuild Irpin or Borodyanka than other regions. So we can see what is demonstrating. I mean, maybe it's a little bit cynical for the business. It's what Volodymyr has said. It's not that just go under shelling in 10 kilometers. Of course, we're talking about Transcarpathia, Chernivtsi, Ivano-Frankivsk. Of course, there are a lot of projects everywhere. At least we would have people, resources, and technologies. And finally, for which construction material we have a definite deficit. Here, I would like to thank the Institute of Economic Research, Ukrprom, external expertise. I think Mr. Vlasiuk will also commend that huge work that they're doing, and to which one we are referring. Basically, the main deficit is concentrated in the electric equipment, concrete, cement, mineral wool, and polyvinyl chloride profiles. We have formally, the construction is quite big, but taking into account the number of objects are not working, part of the objects are damaged, and again, the demand is relocated from the central and eastern Ukraine, mostly to the western Ukraine. then this possibility or this challenge, everybody sees it different regarding the new objects. We understand that Kovalska is being the gas concrete factory in the west of Ukraine, and there are some other projects. We also have a traditional problem with the sheet glass. It was not produced in Ukraine, and it's not being produced now. From half a dozen of various projects for new factories, we understand that it's like investment of 150 million euro plus, and that's quite difficult from the technological point of view. Really hope that these investments will be implemented, at least some of them, and to make sure that we don't depend on imports by 100%. And a significant share of the balance of construction materials was the imports from Russia and Belarus, sometimes via third countries. And it's very unlikely that these volumes will be at least in the closest time, but maybe in some long-term perspective, it's very unlikely that it will be reinstated. This will also influence the demand, because more than 30% of the market was filled with the Russian and Belarusian imports. It's evident that this will not be the case now. Okay, and from point of view of some main recommendations, once again, please pay attention to the green production and build back better. This will be once again a huge opportunity to get better, higher quality objects, and also with the jump to bring up construction standards to the European levels. From the other hand, this will be a huge challenge, like from the point of view of processing of waste and energy efficient technologies. We really hope that the national investors and the international investors will also be investing into this construction materials industry. But the institutional idea is very evident. You can pragmatically evaluate the prospects of the Ukrainian consumer sector, the amount of population, the pace of return of the population, the security situation, but it's evident that in many areas, even now, once again, I repeat, Ukraine can't meet their own needs. And we are seeing this a whole range of investments in the Western Ukraine, in the first place, in more safe areas. We are seeing also the situation when more brave or more loyal investments, as CRH, are buying other assets in Ukraine. This, in my point of view, is a positive factor of trust to the Ukrainian market and some long-term trust to the fact that Ukraine, on a long-term basis, things will be all right. I always say that voting with a dollar or euro, it's a much more reliable sign than any other concerns or just really a huge heartfelt support in words. So a very important factor, it's actually engaging of international financing, export financing from the export credit agencies for the equipment that needs to be supplied, like for the new production, some lift, elevators or sewage equipment, as well as in general for the sector of construction materials, as well as the insurance of military risks via MIGA and the like. And also, I already mentioned briefly about the implementation of the modern standards. This process is ongoing, and I would call the whole business to be prepared for this. This will be, whether we want it or not, and in many spheres, this will be a very significant influence. I believe who was before in the government quarter, they remembered the billboards that were hanging there in terms of fighting the asbestos containing roofing. It was forbidden to use it, so we have to understand in a very rational meaning that such issues unlikely will be successful in long term in the future. Many thanks to you once again, the link. Please, whoever is interested, please look up the full-scale report. I believe that on the one hand, it will show the scale of the project problem and the challenges that we have there. But from the investment point of view, the point of view of the construction materials, that's a huge opportunity. So I really hope that the investors will be looking at this, understanding the balance, and the conclusions are very much evident. Many thanks. We are going to discussion in case we are going where we have the discussion, where we're participating. Many thanks for the activity. We are discussing this today at our discussion. Volodymyr from Ukrzonprom, external expertise. We also have Lev Partshaladze, the president of Builders of Ukraine, and the member of the policy recovery team, the advisor to the Ombudsman Council of Ukraine. Hopefully some more people will join us. That's how I would like to give this word. Mr. Volodymyr, after Maxym, we heard that we can't produce everything that is necessary for the construction, but later we said that most likely what we can do, there are certain elements are needed, and also what Maxym said about the cement. On the other hand, those who mentioned that this data is already outdated. Maybe you can show. Actually, I guess we have what we need for the recovery and what we need for launching the construction. Thank you, Oleksandra. Thank you, colleagues. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you for the possibility to take this discussion. Much has been mentioned. I also want to say regarding the possibility to cover the demand, we can cover the demand by 90% in money terms, the amount of materials that have to be consumed within this recovery process. But if we look in the spectrum of goods, Maxym Nefyodov already mentioned about it. It's what we can't do, but in case we have the growth that I will talk to you about, then that will be difficult to develop these products. We can imagine that the recovery has started after the end of the war. So I would like to say that maybe you can show me the slides. I wanted to briefly go over that. I do have the presentation, which I earlier showed, what I will be using, but to take into account that we have some time limitations, I think you should have the possibility to demonstrate your screen.
Сейчас, секундочку, я вверх прогорну її. So
we have done the research, two researches actually. We tried to come up in a very systematic manner and to calculate how many materials we would need to rebuild what was damaged and destroyed. We understand that with the course of the war, this figure is changing, but we made this evaluation, how much we need, and we evaluated the readiness of our sector for the construction of that number of materials. So this was two works. This is the first one that we did in 2023. Then we did even the newer work in 2024. On the first was USAID. The previous time it was Dyer International from the United States. I will be basing my speech on our first research because the second one is still about limited possibility to share the results. Once it's possible to share, I will share with you. So what is the objective of this work? First of all, is to assess the needs of construction materials and to give as detailed as possible the types of materials that we need, to study the state of the construction materials production sector to which extent they suffered from the war and how ready they are to meet this demand. And of course, it's also preparation of proposals to eliminate barriers in the work of the sector, taking away the barriers that are here in the work of the center in order to develop the production of such materials and developing the full cycle in the construction of such materials. We mentioned that we don't have the sheet glass. It's fantastic that Ukraine doesn't have still one single factory. There are some types of products that were mentioned, and it's important to create conditions that we would have the full cycle of production, because that has to be considered as a big chance and as a big block of work of our plan for the recovery of Ukraine, because it foresees the production of a huge number of products, construction works, construction materials, and very significant impetus for the economy, which we need. And I would also propose to look at it as part of the recovery plan. And of course, if we have this production of construction materials, this will improve the structure of our economy, because from our point of view, we discussed it jointly, the structural changes in the economy should also be part of our recovery plan, so it becomes more higher productivity. I would try to go further quickly in terms of the volumes of the construction materials. This is the map of the World Bank, because the Kyiv School of Economics is also using this map. I would like to say immediately that we were based on the data from the Kyiv School of Economics. I'd like to thank to our colleagues that they would see the necessity for such a monitoring project, the project for observation. I think this project is being improved along the way. We communicate with the colleagues when we did our second research, and in the future we will be cooperating. That's why we based all our data on the primary data from this research by Kyiv School of Economics. That's where we have the data from destruction, for partially destroyed, fully destroyed. We have used our methodology. We converted this into figures and indicators of the number of construction materials that are necessary for the reconstruction. So this map shows the intensity of hostilities, and you can see that all of the borders of Ukraine would require the ones which are at the front line and which were ruined at the previous stages of the war. So that NEAT covers basically the whole map of Ukraine in the borders of 1991. The biggest part, the biggest share of objects that we considered that the construction materials are necessary, these are real estate and infrastructure. That's 79%. From this segment, we could cover 88% with our calculations. I will not go into detail into figures because there are so many and take into account time and the main topic of discussion. All of the figures that I mentioned here, these are the figures from the report of the Kyiv School of Economics. So we have calculated in terms of the needs in construction materials, in a few words, how we get it. The square meters which need to be rebuilt, we convert it through the coefficient in the need of construction materials into the quantity of the materials that will be necessary for the reconstruction. Also, we took into account the coefficients of expenditures using the principle of build back better. We will not, of course, rebuild those that were before the war. Most of it was built during the Soviet times. So separately, we separately have developed 16 types of buildings that have to substitute the ones that are here now. And here I'm showing you the result of our calculations, the needs of construction materials. These are the calculations for 31 items of construction materials, starting from armature concrete, brick aerated concrete doors. Actually, there are hundreds of positions, more small positions. We have ignored them for the time being, and we are looking at 80% of the most important positions. And the overall figure of the needs in the construction materials, it is mentioned here. What is the structure of this table? For each type of construction materials, we're showing the unit of measurements, thousands of tons, once again, concrete, armature, brick aerated concrete, and we're giving it in prices of last year and the overall share in the total cost.
Ну і загальна вартість, скільки нам потреба будівельних матеріалів, це 62 мільярди 800
That's 62
мільйонів
billion,
доларів. Тобто це досить велика цифра, але на
$800
сьогоднішній
million.
день я просто наперед
It's a huge figure,
ця цифра на
this
основі
figure
наших других
is on
розрахунків
the
буде
basis
дещо
of our
менше.
other
І одна з
calculations will be
причин
slightly
цього,
less.
тому що,
And one of the
по-перше,
reasons
в доларах
is
ціни
because
на
in
будівельні
dollars the
матеріали на
prices
внутрішньому
for the
ринку
construction
знизились.
materials,
Хоча в гривнях вони не зросли, вони зросли, але в доларах знизились, оскільки ми
they
робимо
decreased
оцінку
in
в доларах,
dollars,
оскільки курсові співвідношення, ми знаємо, що, значить, гривня там суттєво девальвувала по відношенню до долара. І друге, що
and
частина
hryvnia
вже
significantly
робіт цих договорів
devaluated versus
Так от
dollars.
тепер питання, яка
So the
частина була
question
відбудована?
is,
Я скажу свої
what
оцінки.
part
Я
was
не дам це
rebuilt?
окремим слайдом, але наші оцінки, вони наступні. Значить,
Our
такої цифри виведеної, консолідованої немає. Але на основі тих даних, які ми
Based on
отримали,
the data
зокрема,
that we
там, з
received,
доповідей прем'єр-міністра, з інших звітів, за період 2022-2023 року було відновлено десь
we have rebuilt once
12,2
again
мільйона квадратних метрів об'єктів. Всього в
1
нас руйнування,
million
якщо це
square meters.
перерахувати в 100%
And if we
зруйновані об'єкти,
recalculate
частково
this,
зруйновані і
there are
повністю,
partially, there are fully destroyed objects. We would need the recovery 59 million of square meters. So out of 59, 12 are already million square meters already renewed. So if they convert this into the figures of construction materials, it will be slightly less that I showed now. So we have taken into account what will be the influence on the economy. If we understand there will be a huge positive influence, that's influence of people, and that's expenses into the budget, and our huge dependency on the financing of the deficit of the budget. We understand that we have to decrease that. So it's an objective necessity. The added value will be for $16.1 million. Billion dollars. 16.1 is added value, salaries $5.6 billion, taxation and $4.4 billion. So that would be 100,000 jobs created. So this will be a very important influence on the economy. So the need of the materials has to be as maximum as possible to be. So we need various. We understand that the funds will be there, so we have to search for some good compromise forms and avoid the option that we are giving you the grants, the loans, but they are tied to the conditions of our materials. We have to work in that direction. And I wanted to also pay attention to the slide, which has a lot to do with our discussion. We have discussed to which extent we will have not the construction materials, but whether we have the capacity for construction, and would they not be a bottleneck during recovery. And we have built a number of graphs of that kind, which shows how much we built before the war, like for instance, volumes of production of housing, residential house, 13.7 million square meters, that's average 1821. In 2022, this was 9.6. In 2023, the effect was 9.7, and then we see the forecast. For forecast, we took the 5 years of recovery. How many years we are ready to recover? We also took 5 years. In case we have the chance to recover, I think we should do it as quick as possible. This will be very difficult. So we took 5 years because this will be the national objective to make it as soon as possible. So in the forecast, we see the graphs of those meters that have to be built. So we understand that those needs that will be remaining, this general construction, because they will require the production of new housing. So it's slightly less than it used to be because we believe that it's less people in Ukraine. Then we had the calculations that adapt to the number of people, and there is, but we see that the needs will be based on what needs to be done in general, improving the residential conditions and the regular demand, even if we go away from the war. And the other demand is connected to what is ruined. And I have a figure how much it will be necessary to recover. The first year, 16.5 million, the second year, 19, and maximum at the fifth year, 24 million square meters. And the line shows me the capacity for the construction works. And we're seeing that the capacity is much less than the need. So the conclusion is as follows. At the stage of recovery, we are forming a huge deficit of the capacities for construction, not the construction materials, but the construction materials capacity. It will be like the third, which is missing. It will be a big challenge how to increase this capacity. And on the right, we show what will be the deficit of production. So this deficit of construction capacity will be limiting the pace that we're talking about. And the next graph, it's we have calculated how many materials would be necessary in millions tons, and we made it to make sure that we can show you about our capacity to make this number of materials. I will quickly, these are main figures. We can see the value of the construction materials, years 19 to 23, and the years of recovery. What will be the value of construction materials that has to be? There must be a significant growth of the construction materials. So we made the research, communicating with companies, with sectors, with producers. What is their condition? Are they able to work further or not? So we could collect all the necessary information for the conclusions in terms of the readiness of the sector to produce this number of products that are necessary for the recovery. Briefly, this analysis that was done, in a few words, I can tell you that the sector preserves its capacity, and the ruining of the sector is not critical. That can influence the production of various types of products. So on the basis of that, I also want to say another important thing. What are the main barriers and main problems? First of all, it's of course the deficit of staff. This is connected to conscription, and because the number of population is decreasing, a lot of people have left. The demographic situation, that's a huge problem. They don't have any assurance that their employees will not be conscripted. They are not sure about the volumes of works. And I can also bring it into the sphere of investment projects. The situation is such that the employees are starting from the point of view that they are afraid to move products because we have the checkpoints where they are being checked, and ending with the fact that it's difficult to plan. There are some key professionals at the company who are so necessary, and that updates the question of economic reservation. The second problem is the energy situation. In 22, there was a very difficult situation when there was a shelling in the beginning of the year that escalates the question of the energy provision of the companies, and the huge. So we have solved.
І автономних встановок електроенергії цими підприємствами. Ну і третє питання – це низький внутрішній попит. Він залишається другий, третій рік поспіль. І загальний висновок такий, що війна виснажує сектор.
And of course, the war is really depleting the sector, and that has to be clearly understood. In case we want that the sector would come in the proper condition, even in these conditions, we need to support this sector. I also want to show you
Ще секундочку.
One
Графік, який
second.
показує дефіцит потужності,
This is
власне, це
the
то, що
graph that
сказав
shows the deficit of
Максим
the
Нефьодов.
capacity.
Я не буду
That's what
повторювати,
Maxym
він вже про
Nefyodov
це сказав.
said.
От ті потужності, яких у нас немає, це
The-
електрообладнання,
those,
наприклад, то, що називається щитовими. Там ми багато
capacity
імпортуємо,
that
це
we don't
компанія
have.
ABB,
That's where
компанія
we a lot
Siemens.
of importing
От це
from
листове скло і
Siemens,
ряд
from
виробників, які
other
знаходяться на
companies.
межі,
It's
скажімо,
sheet
дефіциту.
glass and
Але
also the number
у
of
нас дійсно є
employees that
інвестиційні
are
проекти, вже згадувались Ковальські, Миколаїв і тому подібне. Є
at
інші
the brink of
інвестиційні
the
проекти, але
deficit.
я вам
There are some
скажу
other
таку
investment
от
projects.
відношення рефлексу наших виробників. Наприклад, виробників, ну тут вже
I mean, the
вони є,
producers,
вони скажуть, може,
they're
своє
here.
слово, але
They can say their word, but
відношення до цього питання таке.
the
Ми навіть
issue is
готові
as
були б
follows.
інвестувати,
We were
якби
ready to
відчували попит.
invest in case
Поки
we
попит на нашу
would feel
продукцію
the demand. So
складає
far,
там
the
50
demand
чи
is
60% від
50
наших
or 60%
потужностей,
from
просто
our
керуватися
capacity.
цифрами
Just to be
наступного
guided with the
очікуваного
figures
попиту, коли завершиться
of
війна, ми
this
не можемо. Тому я розумію,
next
що в плані
element when the war is
інвестицій
over,
вони
we
приймають
can't
рішення, зважають на той рівень попиту, який є. А
take
факт
into
такий, що він на
account.
сьогодні низький. Потужності завантажені 50-60%.
So the capacity is loaded with
Ну і все.
50-60%.
Дуже коротко пропозиція заходів
That's
політики.
all.
Значить, політику
And some
треба займатися
proposals in terms of the
обов'язково
policies. Of course,
Перший
we have
блок
to do the
політики
economic
це просто
policy.
заходи із
The first
збереження
policy,
працездатності сектору
it's of
в умовах
course
триваючої
keeping the
війни. І запровадження елементів воєнної економіки,
ability
яка знайде
of
баланс
employment within
між
the
українцем
conditions of
як
the war, to
воїном,
find a
українцем як
balance between a
працівником,
Ukrainian,
між
a
економікою
warrior,
і
and a
між
Ukrainian
війною,
as a
в тому
employee,
числі.
this
Це
economy,
також
and
елемент
between the
воєнної
economy and the war. There's
Далі
also the element
напрямок
of
це
the
підтримка інвестиційного
military
процесу.
economy.
Його
The
треба
next one is
підтримувати.
the
Це
support of the investment
страхування
process. That has to
військових
be
ризиків, це
supported.
доступ
That's
до
insurance of
фінансових
military
ресурсів.
risks.
Є
That's
facility
access to
plan,
financial
його
resources.
треба
There is the
состиковувати з
facility plan.
потребами в будівництві нових потужностей.
They
Звичайно,
have to be
залучати
taken
до
into
цього наших
account
партнерів за кордоном.
and has to be
Будівництво цих партнерських
aligned
соромів
with
це
the
дуже важливо.
capacities.
І третє, це зусилля,
And the
щоб наші
third,
закордонні
it's
партнери пішли нам
efforts
назустріч
that our
виробничо.
international
Що чим
partners
більш вони залучать
would
наших виробників до виробництва,
follow us,
навіть
the
якщо
more
гроші їхні,
they will
тим це
get
краще буде для
engage
всіх.
our
Це буде
employees for their
відмінний ефект.
production, although the
Це
money
буде
is theirs.
зберігати у нас робочі
This will
місця,
keep our
генерувати
jobs,
заробітні
generate
плати, доходи людей і
salaries,
податки в бюджет.
incomes
Це
of people,
означає, що ми
taxes
менше
into the
будемо
budget,
витрачати
and that
на
means
шию
that we will
візитів і
be
залежати від їхньої
less
зовнішньої допомоги.
asking
Але
for
селсу
their
треба
assistance
працювати.
financial,
Системно
but
з
we
цим
have
треба
to work with
працювати.
this.
Вони
We
всі
have to work very
розуміють, але треба, щоб
systematically with
ініціювали
this.
ці питання.
They all
Ну і
understand,
буду
but we need to
закінчувати.
initiate this.
Якщо ми
And I
говоримо
will
про
be finishing. If we talk
розуміння
about
стосовно кадрів
the
спеціалістів,
understanding in
це,
terms of
звичайно,
this
економічне
stuff,
бронювання.
of course,
І
it's the
президент
economic
Кабінету
reservation
Міністрів дати
from
право
30
менеджменту
to
підприємств
50% to give
бронювати
the
найкраще.
right to the
До речі, це
management
буде
of the
сприяти
company
виведенню
to
зарплат і відпусток,
reserve
тому що
the
це
best.
найбільш
And this
крутий
will, by
технічний
the way,
зовнішній
will
податок,
help
це
to
ПДФО.
get the
Знаєте, окремі
salaries
розрахунки під
out
це.
of the gray
На цьому
zone,
треба будувати
because
цю
one of the
політику,
biggest
щоб знайти баланс. Оця цифра 30-50% показує
outcomes would
баланс між
be
армією
showing the
і
real
між цивільною
salaries and
економікою.
the
І
tax
військовим треба пояснювати, що якщо не будуть
that will be
податки і
paid to the
фінансування,
state in
ми не
case
зможемо
we
фінансувати
don't
тих
have
хлопців,
any
країна не
taxes
зможе, які працюють і
from
воюють. Власне, все. Я
our
завершу, тому що
businesses.
так
We
взяв
will not be able to
багато
finance
вашого
our
часу.
war.
Тут в
So
мене ще
sorry for
питання
taking up too
про
much of your time.
автономне
I
забезпечення
also have some
електроенергії.
questions
Є
related to the
і блок питань,
independent
пов'язаних із
energy provision,
стимулюванням
and
внутрішнього
there is the block
ринку.
of issues related at
Звичайно,
stimulation of the
треба
internal
такі
market.
речі, як програма
That's
«Є
where we
відновлення» і
need
державна програма
such things
відновлення,
as
зокрема,
e
житла для тих,
recovery,
хто ймовірно
a
будуть
recovery of
переселятися із інтенсивності
housing
бойових дій.
for
Це
those
все
who
треба
will be
прив'язувати, ну, таким чином,
this will
якби
be
стимулювати ринок. Ну і ще раз
they
повторюю,
need to
підписані
stimulate the
домовленості з
market.
міжнародними
And
донорами
again,
щодо
getting some
максимального
agreements with
залучення наших
international donors
підприємств. До
about
речі, вони дуже добре це
maximum
роблять.
engagement of our
Все, дякую.
companies. We
Вибачайте,
understand
взяв
that
трошки більше
very
часу,
well. Apologies that I
але,
have taken
ну,
too much of your
надіюсь, вам
time, but I hope that
Дуже
it is
дякую,
up to
дуже
the
цікаві
point.
розрахунки і
Yes,
висновки.
very
Щодо
interesting
останнього
conclusions and
якраз хотіла
calculations.
сказати те,
Regarding
що
the
можете,
last one,
згорніть, будь
I
ласка,
wanted
презентацію.
also if you can
А,
close
зараз
the
що ми
screen
Щодо
sharing.
останнього якраз теж хотіла сказати, що
And
ми
also
з
wanted to
донорами
say
якраз говоримо
that
про те, що
we're also talking to
вони фінансували,
donors
наприклад,
that they would
закуповували
finance
і військове
and
оснащення,
would
обладнання
use the
зброї
military
українську,
equipment,
тому що це теж підтримує нашу економіку.
also
Ми
taking into
сьогодні
account as
справді
much
про
possible the Ukrainian
будівництво, і я би
equipment,
хотіла
because that supports our
передати
economy. But
слово
today
пану
we're talking
Леву
more about the
Парtshaladze,
construction. I would like to pass the
саме
floor
з точки
to Lev
зору
Partshaladze.
будівельників. Ми
In
бачили
terms of the
розрахунки, які
construction
нам
people,
показував
we have seen
Володимир
the
Ланда.
calculations that were
Будівельні
shown to us by
компанії не
Volodymyr
дуже
Landa.
приходять
the construction companies are not so eager to come to tenders. Partially, that's one participant through the specifics of public procurement, where it's allowed to have the simplified procurement, Partially,
Ті ж будівельні компанії не дуже
such
приходять
construction
на тендери,
companies,
тому
they're not
що
always
Володя
coming to
теж раніше
tenders
робив
because Volodymyr
інші
also earlier
розрахунки,
did
показував
other
наші попередніх
calculations
презентаціях.
and showed it
Графіки
in
про те,
our
що агентство
presentations
відновлення,
preliminary
наприклад, завжди
that
мало
the
традиційно
recovery
мало
agency
більше
would have
учасників по їх тендерах
traditional low
через те, що колишній голова
number of
агентства
participants in their
відновлення
tenders
Мустафа Наєм,
because
він зустрічався
their
з будівельними
former
компаніями, переконував приходити, що тендер буде
head
чесним. Ми
Mustafa
бачили там,
Nayyem,
по-моєму, якщо не
he
помиляюсь,
convinced them,
4-5 учасників
and
навіть
there
на
were like
тендерах.
4 or 5
От
participants
питання
sometimes at
тому,
tenders.
що нам треба
So the
зробити,
question
щоб
is,
все ж
what
таки
shall we do
будівельні
to make
компанії
sure that the
брали
construction
участь
companies would
в
participate
закупівлях публічних,
in
так?
the
Ну,
public
от мене зараз
procurement?
це цікавить. І
That's what I'm
друге,
interested in. And secondly,
ми знаємо те, що, в
we also
принципі,
know that
дуже
basically
багато компаній,
a lot
вони
of
мають
companies
кримінальні
have
провадження. Тобто це не вироки, а це саме
some
кримінальні
criminal
провадження.
proceedings.
Яким чином
So in
це
which
можна
way
врегулювати?
this can
І
be
що треба
regulated
поміняти, можливо, в
and what needs
законодавстві?
to be
Але от
changed
передусім про закупівлі, будь ласка.
in legislation, but most importantly about procurement.
Що хотів сказати, всі сказали.
I think what I wanted to say basically was said by others.
Гарне запитання.
First of all, it's a good question.
Дійсно,
Truly,
будівельники не дуже хочуть
the construction companies don't really want to come to these tenders
всі тендера проходять через Прозоро.
because majority of the tenders are going through Prozoro. Actually, we like Prozoro, but there are some methods that allow the local authorities to make some corruption activities. They can come up with such requirements that can only be done by a few companies only, or one company. Also, another big problem is with the prices, the salaries. For instance, we don't have open prices, and for instance, like the salary of 7,000 hryvnia, you can't find an employee who will work for 7,000 hryvnia. So what does the construction person do then? They are putting these salaries into other articles, and then coming to 100%, where there is they have law enforcement coming over.
Силовики це хто?
Law enforcement is who? It could be prosecutors, Office of Prosecutor General, Security Service, State Bureau of Investigations, that they even can't come, but they are still coming. They are starting some cases against some officials, and automatically they follow other companies. So a big problem is uncertainty in financing, because what they're doing, they're announcing a tender, the companies give the advance payment, but the advance is given to the account of the treasury, but physically the company doesn't receive these funds. So what are the consequences? The quarter is over and we need to pay VAT. So he needs to put in his real money into VAT, but he didn't get this advance payment. So actually suffering twice. First of all, they have to do the work. First of all, to build, also to pay VAT. And in terms of discipline, in terms of payment, is not there. Also, a huge problem that in the conditions of the agreement, in all these agreements, they have clear deadlines. If you don't fill them out, the consumer can cancel this contract and ask to pay this advance. So in case they don't have good relationship with the local authorities, you can have this in negative, you can find yourself in this negative paradigm. Also, the agency that was created, it was working almost without any bribes. I can absolutely be sure about that, but and also a huge problem is the quality of the design documentation. Whatever is damaged or ruined One of the biggest problems is the culture of our architects, and
смети, які є,
the cost estimates that are already here, they're like 2-3 years behind. You come to some adjustment,
Це таке ж дуже незручне питання.
and it's also not a very convenient question.
Є велика
And
корупційний ризик
there is a big
з місцевих влад.
element
Це
of
основні
corruption
проблеми,
risks from the local authorities.
але вони
This is
дуже великі.
from one of
І
the
ще
biggest
хочу сказати,
problems,
для міжнародних,
and I would like to
наприклад,
say that for
компаній,
international
це
companies,
практично неможливо,
that's
щоб вони зайшли до
basically
наших тендерів, тому що вони зовсім не зможуть прийняти участі. Прийняти вони можуть і зможуть, а
participate.
потім працювати це неможливо. Ну, це от велика...
А чому неможливо?
Я
Why this is
назвав,
not possible?
Ціни не відповідають дійсності.
Because the prices
Дуже прискіпливо відносяться
don't
до
meet the reality. They are being very scrupulous in terms of their
який оголошений, там
responsibility.
7 днів на подачу документів, а треба вже зробити і
And they need to make also some cost estimate, and that's practically not possible to be correctly done, you know.
Я що бачу, зараз ми мали
And we had a meeting with some
іноземними
international
посольствами, наприклад,
embassies,
американські посольства проводило
and the American embassies were doing with our construction companies a seminar, how American companies, with the money of the American companies, can run tenders in Ukraine. And that's even more interesting for the Ukrainian construction companies, because things will be very much transparent. This will be all possible to open up. So I believe, in my opinion, this will be a very good example if for the foreign money, the international companies, the contractors will be exactly the Ukrainian companies. So we will have the competitor for the public procurement, so it will be more interesting to participate in such tenders. That may even change the legislation of Ukraine, because this norm that the average salary is in industry, of course, that doesn't add up the transparency. I also wanted to move to the question whether it's possible regarding the construction materials. Would your construction companies have any problems how they are buying the construction materials, or things all right with logistics? And also what Volodymyr says about the workforce, that's also a big problem or not? The capacity of the company to build and to recover now. Let me start with the second question. There are a huge problem with employees, and if the person has worked for 2 years according to the, if they don't work for 2 years in terms of in accordance with their profession, they lose these skills. You can see 30, 40, 100 people. You can really put them in buses and conscript them. That's a huge problem. And also what you have mentioned, what Volodymyr has said, and Maxym Nefyodov said, what they showed on the slides, what the problems are, it's exactly the case. There are problems with logistics, and I believe the business is adapting quickly, but with conscription, it's very difficult to adapt. Many thanks. I would like to pass on to Mr. Roman, but we will come back. Mr. Roman, you're working in the Business Ombudsman's Council. You're exactly about the protection and defense of business. Because we heard just now, when the construction starts, the public procurement starts, everybody's coming to the company and everybody's trying to ask for something. So, first of all, I was shocked when I was reading this, that basically, yes, the construction companies, almost all construction companies have some criminal proceedings against them. That's the most criminalized market, but there are no sentences. So finally, very few sentences according to these cases. So what are you seeing as the Ombudsman's Council? What is this about? Can you help them in some way?
Доброго дня, дякую за
Good
запрошення.
afternoon. Thank you for the invitation.
В нас в Раді бізнес-омбудсмена зараз
In the Business Ombudsman
ми
Council,
відкрили
we
новий
now
напрямок,
have
це
opened up a new
відновлення.
direction.
То раніше ми
It's
займалися
recovery, because
юридичними
before we were
скаргами,
doing some legal complaints
фінансовими.
and financial.
Зараз ми вже
Now
займаємося
we are doing also
скаргами від будівельників.
the complaints from the construction
Те, що
people.
сказав пан Лев,
And
от
what
всі
Mr. Lev
пункти, я
has
сказав
said,
би, що по
all of
всім
the
пунктам у нас
items,
є
regarding
скарги.
all the items, we have
І
complaints.
я зараз трошки відволікусь.
And I will go off
Що
the
стосується
subject for the
кримінальних
time being.
проваджень, ми ж не
What
займаємося
concerns the
кримінальними
criminal
провадженнями,
proceedings, of course, we are not doing these criminal proceedings. We are doing the complaints that have not yet reached the court or are not in the process of litigation.
Скарг реальних зараз, от пан Лев сказав вірно.
Regarding the real claims,
Все, що
Mr. Lev
стосується
has mentioned it very correctly. That's everything that pertains to
закупівель,
procurement,
участі в тендерах,
participation in tenders,
також цін на матеріали.
also prices for the materials. All of it is quite a lot of complaints and claims from companies, and we're still expecting more complaints because this is like a big problem. And also
Людський ресурс.
the human resource. The human resource, it's once again, unfortunately, we can't influence the resolution of these questions. Maybe with some other questions we can have some impact because we are communicating with the State Recovery Agency and the Ministry of Infrastructure in terms of these questions. Therefore, also Volodymyr said quite an interesting subject he raised in terms of the deficit of the construction materials. That's also quite actual. I don't know even what to add here because really all of it is in front of me, was already mentioned, all speakers, and that's why. But you're getting complaints from construction companies. Did you start any movement to help these companies? So what exactly your activity is about in the direction that you're doing this in terms of recovery? Because the participation of the private sector in recovery, it's exactly construction companies, it's the construction market. So what are your intentions? How can you help? And what exactly you're planning to do? For the understanding of the business who is partially present, looking at the participants lists, what shall they expect? Maybe you can also make some meetings with the Ministry of Recovery or some other bodies to resolve the questions that Lev has mentioned. Yes, we have had a meeting with the Ministry of Recovery and the Agency for Recovery. For instance, we have one of the complaints. It pertains to the recovery of one of the electrical stations, and it includes quite a big range of problems, starting from the period of restorative works, nationalization of the company, of the station. So this was not only the problem of non-signing the act of performed works, but also understanding the reasons. We started that, in fact, the acts of performed works are not signed. But if we go deeper, why they're not signed? So we are engaged in recovery almost in a very wide sense. So that is connected with construction or recovery of some difficult to explain. That's a huge range of problems. So the business can turn with any problems which are connected with the recovery. We also have some problems with, we talked about the tender in terms of the procurement
виграє одна
that
компанія, але
one company
ті
is winning,
компанії, які хотіли
and those
брати
companies
участь в тендері, вони просто не
that
проходять
participate in the
по
tender,
елементарно по
they
габаритам
didn't go
приміщення, яке вони хочуть
elementarily
встановити. Це
regarding the
елементарно, скажімо
size
так.
of the
І просто
premises
не
that they want
проходять і
to put
все.
this
Але тому
inside.
виграє одна
And
компанія,
that's
і
why
ви
only
вже
one
самі
company is
це
winning,
сказали,
as you already said.
все зроблено під одну компанію.
This is
І,
only
до речі,
done
це і
for
в
one
Харківській
company,
області.
and this is basically in Kharkiv
Ну, а ще
Oblast.
в мене питання.
And I also have a
Це не
question.
публічні закупівлі. Як,
These are not the public procurement.
надати
How
інформацію
can we give
тим, хто
information
хоче
to the ones
брати участь
who
в
want to
закупівлях,
participate in the procurement,
тих, яких були показані? Як
the ones that
побачити
are
цю
showed? How
закупівлю?
can we see
Як її
this?
рознести по
How
всім
to
будівельним
bring it
компаніям,
around
що вони
to all
хотіли
construction
брати?
companies that they would want to
Я
take
передам
part
слово
in?
зараз тоді
I would
Володимиру
pass the
спочатку,
floor to
потім
Volodymyr
можливо трошки
for the time
підхопити
being,
Володю.
and then maybe I will
Так,
pick it up.
публічно ця інформація
Yes, publicly this
з'являється на
information
щоденній
is
основі,
appearing
причому
on a
вона
daily
з'являється в тому
basis.
форматі, який
It is
зазвичай
appearing in the format
незручний для
which
тих
is not
компаній,
that
які
convenient for these
можуть
companies
взяти в ньому участь.
that can
Звичайно, якщо буде
participate in
якась
it
там або
in
галузева
case
асоціація, або
there is
громадська
some
організація, яка зможе
NGO
ідентифікувати,
or
що,
industry
наприклад,
organization
закупівлі
that
в
can
цьому регіоні
identify
цього
that for the
типу робіт
procurement
релевантні
for
для
these
такої групи
types of
компаній,
works.
і їх якось автоматизовано повідомити, це могло бути корисно.
To inform it,
З
that
іншого
it would be
боку,
useful. On the other hand,
скажімо так,
let's put it this way,
компанії,
the company, some companies that would want to participate,
вони б це могли самі робити.
they could do this.
Фільтрувати запити.
If we
Це
filtrate
не так багато
this,
часу займе знайти релевантні
if
закупівлі.
we can
З
find
іншого
some
боку,
relevant
це не дуже
procurement,
ефективно витрачання часу, а ми
also it's not a very efficient spending of time. We have to be more productive.
Може бути централізована, але це може бути централізовано як на рівні компанії Прозоро,
So
так і
at the
на
level of
рівні
Prozoro and the level of the civil
Дякую, Володя. Я
companies.
просто додам,
Thank you,
що
Volodymyr.
якраз
I would like
наші
to
фронтисти,
add
коли роблять моніторинг
that
закупівель,
our
вони
colleagues who are
показували
doing
те,
the
що
monitoring
через те,
of
що відбуваєш, тобто дозволено, в принципі, зараз
take into
спрощені
account
закупівлі
that
по
we have
проектах
the
відновлення і відбудови, то
simplified
іноді навіть на
procedures,
великі обсяги
even
закупівлі
sometimes for
з'являються
some big
непрозоро,
volumes
коли
of
укладена
procurement,
угода,
when we have
фактично
the,
навіть на сайті
even at the website
на
of
сайті
the,
закупівельника може там не бути цієї інформації. Тобто це
there may
якраз
be not
іде
this
чисто
information.
до договірні відносини, прямі закупівлі, коли закуповують своїх організацій, тобто буває по-різному. Але
It
зараз
happens
це дедалі
differently.
більше, в принципі, закупівель
So
заводиться на Прозоро.
it's really
Багато
more
органів
in
влади
Prozoro,
визначили,
and
що вони тільки закуповують через
that
Прозоро, а не
they're
по
buying
відновленню.
via
Саме
Prozoro.
так з прозорістю добивається, в принципі, позитиву. І уряд минулого тижня ухвалив дуже важливий для нас закон. Це
And
з
it's
приводу
very,
того,
very
що
important
всі закупівлі по
law for
відновленню
us
мають
that all the
будівництво, в
procurement,
принципі, мають мати
they
ПКД
have to
оприлюднений
have
на Прозоро. І це і в нормальному форматі, тобто це частково може вирішити питання, як нас,
public
як
information on
моніторити,
Prozoro.
в принципі, будівельні
So those who are monitoring
компанії,
this,
зручніше працювати з
because it
документацією.
will be more interesting to work with the
Пане Лев, я
documentation.
хотіла ще вас одне
Mr. Lev,
запитати.
I
Ми
also
чули
wanted to
від
ask you about
будівельних
something
компаній
else.
менше,
We
що,
heard
в
from the
принципі, іноді
construction
вони
companies
організовуються,
that
скажімо,
sometimes
з
they are
більшими
organizing
компаніями, і
with
велика
bigger
компанія тоді
companies,
представляє,
and
бере
then
участь в
the
закупівлях
big company is
і віддає
participating in
підряди
this
меншим, але в
construction and
результаті
does
менші
the subcontracts to the small
просто
companies,
втрачають, тому
but
що
as the
велика
result,
компанія забирає на себе,
the
скажімо так,
small
відсоток. І це
companies are
робиться не
losing
тому, що
because the
маленька
big company
компанія
is
хоче,
taking
а
the
тому що саме
percentage.
великі
It's
компанії
not that
не
the
дуже
small
дають,
company wants it,
домовляються саме з органами влади місцевими для того, щоб
so it
робити
is
такі
simply
закупівлі.
done to make
Ви
sure
щось
that they
про
can
це
do such
знаєте?
procurement.
Тобто,
Do you
які
know
взагалі
anything
от у
about
вас
that? What is in
в
general
асоціації, от у
in
вашій
your association,
конфедерації, перепрошую,
in your
от
confederation?
співвідношення, як
What
працюють
is this
компанії, і чи
relationship?
ви
How the
виходите
companies are
от
working,
своїми
and how
пропозиціями
you
до
are coming
уряду на
with your
зустріч
proposals
общественникам
to the
для того, щоб
government
змінити, от, наприклад,
in
там
order to
норму
change
про заробітну плату, яка, я думаю,
some
дуже
norms
шкідлива,
about
там,
the
або ще
salaries,
якісь
which is
норми.
very much harmful, or maybe some other norms?
Ну, перше запитання.
First of all,
Перше запитання
the
про
first question about
те, що компанія якась виїжджає потім на субпідряди.
that the
Це, в
company that is
принципі,
doing
нормальна
this,
норма,
that's
тому що
normal,
є генпідрядник,
because
є
we have some the
субпідрядник,
general contractor and
це
other
окрема,
contractor, and that's
є
like a
компанії,
separate
які тільки
issue
спеціалізуються,
that is
вони організують роботу
specialized in certain work
як генподрядна
as
організація.
the general contractor.
Це нормальний процес.
That's a normal process.
Але дійсно є
But
інша історія,
truly,
що ви
there is some other thing which
компанія,
you're
яка
talking about,
залетіла, а потім
that some
роздає,
company
щоб
won it,
всі,
and
як
then
кажуть,
they are distributing to
сутки
others
збирати для
all the
себе.
cream to be collected for themselves.
Це є такі запитання.
So it's
А то, що
an issue.
називається заробітна платні,
So what is believed as
заробітна платня, в принципі, вона
the salary issue,
відкрита. І
this
кожна область
salary
може
is
робити свою.
opened
Але вони
and
всі
every
бояться,
oblast can do theirs,
цю
but they are
заробітну
all
платню,
afraid
думають, що вона
this
буде завищена.
salary,
І,
they believe that it will be
і
too
деякі
high,
обласні адміністрації,
and
наприклад,
some oblast
просять від
administrations
міністерства, щоб
ask
вони
from the
написали.
ministry that they would
Але
write
дуже
that,
важко, наприклад, даже
but
якщо брати
it's very
Київ,
difficult
Київську
in
область і
case we
Київську
talk
область,
even
вони
Kyiv or
там
Kyiv
тільки
Oblast.
Святошинський район. Заробітні платні, дуже різні будуть. Там, де
It's very difficult
прифронтові
to
зони,
have
там
this.
інші,
If it's
інші
frontline
вартості
zones, it will be a different value of works.
І, тобто не можна казати,
So
щоб
you can't
можна,
say
що заробітна
that
плата
it's,
може бути середня
the salary
вартість,
can
вартісна
be of
заробітна
average
плата.
value,
Тому що я думаю,
because
що це
I believe
дуже індивідуальний
that's
підхід,
a very individual approach,
і просто
and
треба
simply
відійти
you have to
від
go
того
away
менталітету,
from the
що якщо там
mentality
буде написано
that in
30 тисяч
case
гривень, це
if
погано.
it's 300,000 hryvnia, it's bad.
Але якщо це не
But
написати,
if we don't write that, then
з'являється, що компанія, що робить?
we see that the company is doing what?
Завишають в матеріалах,
They
потім
increase the prices in materials,
передається кошти на
then
якусь
they
компанію,
pass this money to some
бере
company,
потім, як кажуть у нас,
then,
обналичує,
as they
а потім
say,
видає в
they
конвертах. Тобто
cash them
воно
out
втричі
and give them in
порушує закон.
envelopes.
І тут
So they are
всі
violating the
наші
law 3
колеги,
times.
силовики
So
тут
all
як
our
тут.
colleagues
Розумієте?
are
Це
here
велика
to
проблема.
catch. That's a big
Дякую
problem.
дуже. Да, і тут проблема
Many
в тому,
thanks.
що потім
And the
приходять
problem
наші
is
гроші,
that
наприклад, і
next our
говорять, що
money
бетон
comes
від їх закупівлі
and
коштує
say
набагато
that,
більше, ніж він має коштувати, саме тому, що там
that
може
the
бути
grid
зашита
has to be more.
заробітна плата. Я хотіла би
So
прочитати
I wanted
коментар
to
з
read the
чатику
comments
Дмитра, що
from
каже, що
the
варто розділяти публічність і
chat,
прозорість. Наявність
that it's
посередку може
important to
зрозуміти, що ж таки будують і чому воно так коштує, але
and why it is
залишиться
like this,
незрозумілим і
but it would be
непрозорим
not
питання,
clear
чому саме
and
цей
not
підрядник це
always
робить.
clear why
Тому
this
для повернення
particular
прозорості буде
contractor is doing
потрібно
this.
відновити тендери, а не
So
просто публікацію
why
договорів. І
we
тут
would
я
need
справді
to
аплодую, тому що це справді дуже важливо. І ми про це теж говорили, наскільки я
reinstate
пам'ятаю, в
tenders.
травні.
We
Коли
also
в нас
talked about it
якраз
in May
темою випуску
when
місяця було якраз аналіз закупівель. І Володя
we analyzed this
презентував
procurement
свою
and Volodya
записку
presented his
про консультативну, що справді тендери треба відновити. Вже з позитивного це те, що от пан Лев
requests that the
сказав, що
tenders
7
have to
днів
be
зараз на
reinstated
те, щоб податися на конкурс. Зараз цей термін, наскільки я знаю,
in order.
продовжили, він це 14 днів. Тобто в результаті все ж таки інші компанії
So as a
будуть
result,
більше
other
мати
companies
можливості брати
will
участь в
have the
тендерах.
possibility
У
to
нас
have
в
more
чаті також було
possibility
велике
in participating in
обговорення з
tenders. We also
приводу
have
того,
a big
що
discussion in
багато
the chat
будівництва це
from the
були
point of view
дороги,
that a
що
lot of
фактично це не
construction was
зовсім
actually
дороги, а
roads.
експлуатація. Я
It's
хотіла
not
би
actually the
попросити
roads, it's
Володимира
maintenance. So I
прокоментувати
wanted
це.
to ask Volodymyr to comment on that.
Так, дійсно,
Yes, really.
в цій презентації ми представили
In
дані,
this
які
presentation, we have
стосувалися
presented the
всіх
data
будівельних
that
робіт,
was
які підходять
concerning
під
all
кодекс
the
будівельні
works
роботи.
which
Воно
is
включає
pertaining to
всі
the code
дорожні роботи, включаючи
works,
експлуатаційне
road
утримання
works,
доріг, яке
that
зараз,
includes
звичайно,
even
займає
maintenance of
домінуюче
roads,
місце в
which is
структурі
taking the dominant
дорожніх
part
робіт.
in the
Що
structure of the
застосовується?
works.
Будівництво нових доріг
The construction of new roads is
деяке
almost
присутнє,
absent,
воно зараз
and the
на
one that is
стадії
present
розробки
is at the
проектно-кошторисної
stage of the
документації.
development of the
Тобто не
cost
йдеться про
estimate
те, що
documentation.
хтось зараз будує нову
So
велику дорогу
they're
з
not
нуля.
talking that
Це
somebody is
зараз
building
не
some
на
big new
часі,
road
і
from
я
zero.
розумію, що
This is not
особливо в
timely at the
прифронтових
moment,
регіонах, але
and
навіть
especially in the
у
frontline
більш
areas,
безпечних регіонах це,
even in more safe
скажімо,
areas.
ніяко не дуже поширена
This is
практика в
basically not a very widespread practice.
Дуже дякую. Теж хочу
Many
уточнити, що
thanks.
Володимир показував топ просто
What
компанії,
Volodymyr
топ
said
закупівлі,
to the
які
companies
там
and top
насправді там велика роль
procurement,
це дороги.
there was a big
Але
role
водночас
is
цього року
roads.
будується
But at the
дуже
same
багато
time, this
укриттів в
year,
школах,
we are building a lot of
відновлюється соціальна
shelters in schools.
інфраструктура,
We are
але
renovating
передусім
the social
відновлюється
infrastructure.
також
But most
енергетика. Там частка
importantly, we are also
відбудованих,
rebuilding
відновлених
energy
об'єктів
sector.
порівняно з
And
Ходьманом
if we
набагато вище, ніж
compare the rebuilt objects, their share is much bigger than in other spheres. In our presentation, by the way, our presentation is available from the website, and also it is in chat in Zoom. So please look it up, and we'll see regarding the rebuilt objects and exactly what was asked in the chat about the housing, residential housing, the rebuilding of multi-storied buildings and private homes amounts to some 24% from the houses that were damaged or destroyed. The share is quite low, really, but the need is quite huge because quite a lot of damaged houses. And it's important to say here that the government has been helping to rebuild, renew, recover at the expense of the program that was mentioned by Volodymyr, відновлення, recovery. This program is expanded to make sure that IDPs can participate in it. That's very positive, but they took too long to understand how to compensate for the lost housing for the ones who have it left on the occupied territories, and it's not in the registers. It's not, there is no confirmation that what has happened to that housing. But less than that, the European Investment Bank is starting a project for the social housing. They will be building houses that will be social housing, and exactly this will cover partially the need for the ones who can't buy it. I can see Volodymyr's hand. Volodymyr, please. Thank you, Oleksandra. In the chat, there was one question raised. Maybe you could have mentioned it, but I wanted to concentrate my attention on it. It's the construction of the backup housing who are forced to move away from the war. This was back in 2022 clear that such a development of events is possible, and we understand that it's possible in the future. Hopefully it will be minimum. But the people who left from there, I have a lot of acquaintances from my side, and I believe you have too. They raise a question. They say we can't and we should not build some new premises, buy it, because the majority don't have that. Of course, there are some separate citizens who have it, but it's very good, but there are very few. So evidently, this program of backup residential housing, it shall be implemented in the western parts of Ukraine. Two questions are resolved. In case the front line is coming, we don't give people to them because they want to take our people. We want to make sure that we can create as comfortable as possible the conditions that people would go there. Also, that's rehabilitation of the construction market. I know that the e-construction, e-recovery program doesn't cover the programs that we have mentioned. Many thanks to colleagues for raising these questions. By the way, we are proposing this in our developments. This is something that we should fight for and we should continue to advocate. Many thanks raising this question. The government is in the making. I think it's going to be expanded to IDPs. So e-Oselia, it's about the ones who have the capital. Unfortunately, in the majority of cases who had to be displaced, they normally would not have this money. And that's what Volodymyr has said today. The budget has a huge gap. We have to understand where to take the money from. We meant also to have Vadim Litvin, and we wanted to raise the question of rebuilding of energy efficient materials because we said that we want to build back better. We want to rebuild better than it used to be. That's about energy efficiency, about energy efficient materials. And as far as I know, we talked at one of our meetings that we don't have the standards for the processing of construction waste into construction materials. This is, again, something that we are expecting a lot from the government in terms of movements in this sphere. In case any of the colleagues would like to add, to finalize a few reflections, please raise your hand. I will give the floor to you. Otherwise, I'm very happy for the participation. Many thanks for our participants who were very active in the chat today. And the presentation will be shared in the materials, and the request stays at Facebook. It will also be available at YouTube, and you will be invited to our next meetings. And those organizations who have come to us, please do join us in a competition in October. I would like to wish everybody a quiet evening. Goodbye. Thank you.